Welcome one and all, especially the class of 2023. I'm very honored to be here. On March 12th of this year, I came out onto the Oscars stage in a sparkly silver gown with a bejeweled neckpiece. My friends called me a space empress. I like the idea of being a futuristic avatar, and I might as well have been, as the whole notion of my being a major figure at the most celebrated of Hollywood events was just as preposterous as my flying a spaceship to a distant planet. I was elected president of the Academy of Motion Pictures in August of last year by a board of 54 governors, which includes some of the most talented and well-known names in Hollywood. But there was absolutely nothing in my childhood that could have foretold my taking on this high-profile role. I was, in fact, to my family, not a space empress, but rather a space cadet. I was a little dreamy, impractical, they said. I had no specific direction, not a clue what I wanted to be when I grew up. In fact, for an elementary school essay of that dreaded topic, I simply said, I don't know what I want to do. I just know I don't want a 9-to-5 job. That's about the most prescient thing I ever said in my life. But here I am, humbly standing before you, granted with a bit of an imposter syndrome. Thank you, President Clayton Rose, the Bowdoin Board of Trustees, particularly Committee Chair Andy Serwer, my friend Derek Hu, for inviting me. To all of your credit, I was asked to address you months before my presidency was announced. A friend asked why I was invited to receive this honorary degree at a college to which I previously had no connection, and I very honestly said, I do not know, and I'm afraid to ask. What if you all realize that you have the wrong person? Maybe you really wanted Janet Yellen. My son once Googled my name, Janety, and he said, Ms. Yellen's name came up first, but then shortly thereafter mine did. So by now, I do recognize that my life, my achievements have become a symbol and a beacon of hope for others, especially women, especially people of color, but maybe less obviously, also those who feel any uncertainty in their lives, who don't feel they exactly fit in a box. Yes, being a woman, being Asian American have absolutely defined so much of who I am, and I am proud to speak from the perspective of someone who has experienced the lifting of many curtains, veils, ceilings. But I am also just another human walking this planet in many ways, just like all of you. And my hope is that within my story, there may be nuggets that help you design yours. Preparing to speak with all of you has given me a rare opportunity to reflect on what that might be. My parents came to the US from China as grad students in the late 40s, met at the University of Michigan, and decided to stay after the changed Chinese regime no longer subsidized their studies. They were essentially refugees. My mother got a job at the United Nations, and my parents moved us to a Jewish suburb on Long Island because they heard the schools there were very good. In our neighborhood, all the houses were brand new, cookie-cutter split-level homes, differentiated only by exterior paint colors. Oh, but inside, that was where I peeked into lives wildly different from mine. While we had braised lion's head stew with cabbage, my friends ate exotic hamburgers. I was embarrassed by our cuisine. As you may have surmised, we were the only Asian family in the neighborhood. In second grade, my beautiful teacher, Miss Weiss, who had hair the color of sunlight and big blue eyes that matched the sky, offered us a fun exercise. We were each to bring in a baby picture of ourselves. She would then project them on a screen, and the class would guess to whom it belonged. You got it already. I picked a photo where I sat in a stroller with windswept hair and a goofy grin. I thought I was pretty cute. And when my picture came up on that overhead projector, the class immediately burst out laughing. There was no need to guess who that was. In that instant, frozen in time, I was mortified with the realization that I truly looked different from everyone else. That shock of self-consciousness was exacerbated by many others, such as the dreaded walk down the bus aisle, where inevitably somebody would exaggerated slant their eyes and chant ching chang chung, chicken chow mein, or whatever. For myself, I stood in front of the mirror and did the opposite of what the police did and tried to massage my eyes into a rounder shape, as if that were the key to belonging. I also learned to listen and watch very carefully about how they behaved, how they talked. For everyone was a they and not a we. Even my own family became a they, since a gaping distance grew between us. While I was off to bar mitzvahs and seders, where I managed to stomach the gefilte fish, they were bent over mahjong tables. While in high school in the summer of 1972, my family received the most unexpected news. After a decades-long chill that prevented them from visiting their families in China, then President Nixon was invited and accepted to go. Following that, Chinese Americans were also welcomed to visit. After packing suitcases full of rice and cloth for our relatives, I found myself in this very ancient, very poor, very populated country that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Arriving by train from Hong Kong at the southern border of China, lined with military personnel, the only means of entry at the time, we were met by about 36 relatives excitedly waving at us, none of whom I had ever seen. They and everyone else were dressed almost identically, but when I looked at their facial features and gestures, there was an undeniable connection. We had so much in common, and yet so little. There was laughter and many tears during the 3 weeks of nonstop chatter, revealing stories that were both tragic and comedic. In the end, the experience stirred something inside me and caused me to ponder so many big questions about the role of family, of culture, politics, history in our lives. I thought about how I almost grew up in China and what I would be like if I did. Up until then, I naively thought I had just boring suburban parents who did their commutes back and forth into the city. I did not think about how hard they worked to get us to that suburb, how they took giant leaps of faith to design their own lives in a country where they did not speak the native language, and that was also rife with discrimination as defined by the McCarthy era. When I returned home from that trip, my curiosity about China grew into an obsession. I had to know more. In fact, I had to do something that very, very few people did at the time. I had to live there. In March of 1980, after graduating from college, I found myself in a musty, dusty dormitory in Beijing with no hot running water. I may have thought I didn't fit in New Hyde Park, but here I really didn't fit in. I never felt more American, being deprived of all my creature comforts. At first, I hung out with Western students who were in an exchange program, but then I found I was terribly conspicuous and was regularly being blocked from foreign enclaves like the Peking Hotel and Friendship Store. So over time, I found it more comfortable to spend time with locals. I dressed in blue and gray, rode my bicycle everywhere, and enjoyed the feeling of anonymity. After a lifetime of being singled out as a minority, feeling the weight of scrutiny and anxiety around prejudice, I found it comforting to now be in the majority. I remember one day being at a hotel when a tour bus full of Americans arrived. They were wearing colorful clothes, the women sporting bouffant hairdos and bright lipstick, and I sarcastically commented, "The circus has come to town." And then I caught myself. These were just ordinary Americans like the people whom I'd grown up with. But I had suddenly othered them, objectified them. And I was struck, horrified really, at how quickly a mental switch could be flipped. I saw them as the majority did. The brilliant writer Noah Yuval Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, discusses how the thing that distinguishes our species is that we are compelled to believe what others around us believe. Our belief systems bind us, whether they be our beliefs in political systems or religion or traffic laws or beauty. Our beliefs are a very powerful force, but can also be a very destructive one. In China, I found myself at such a crossroads of identity and beliefs, wanting very much at times to belong, to adapt to the new environment, to be more Chinese, but also wanting to evolve my own values, to speak up for injustices, to not just go along and be one of the masses. I met many cultural creators, writers, painters, musicians, filmmakers, who too were struggling to find their own voice in their new and more modernized country. What particularly excited me was seeing Chinese films featuring people who looked like me and were relatable, three-dimensional characters who struggled, loved, lost, and gained. Growing up, I simply had never any of that. And now for the first time through these movies, I felt seen, heard, and valued. My excitement in seeing these films came with the realization that I too had been carrying deep-seated biases about my own race. With only the most negligible or negative roles of us presented on screen, I subconsciously absorbed the belief that we were not worth being seen unless we were evil seductresses or subservient butlers or nerdy friends. These new Chinese films empowered me to believe that we could be more than unsavory background characters. Emboldened by these relatable, larger-than-life images on screen, I wanted others to have the same experience. And though I did not realize it at the time, that epiphany and the urgency that followed to carry on that mission became the foundational principles for everything else that I was to do in my life. The question still lingered, though. What was I going to be when I grew up? My parents reluctantly went along with my scheme to live in China, but they were skeptical. Despite trying to inculcate me with as much Chineseness as possible, they were dismayed that once again I was making life choices that were highly impractical. Where would my dreams around Chinese cinema lead? There was no path that was lit. Many Asian Americans say that our parents give us only 3 choices of what we can be in life. Number 1, a doctor. Number 2, a lawyer. Number 3, a failure. As of March this year, though, there was a 4th option, an Oscar winner. Well, I was no Oscar winner, but gainful employment did follow, and yes, getting an MBA after I returned from China probably did help. I'll give them that much. A company in San Francisco wanted to show new Chinese cinema. I was hired to run it, the only job I felt qualified for and was interested in. I was happy as a clam flying back and forth to China, selecting films and taking Chinese delegations to international film festivals. Then one day, a forward-looking executive at Universal Studios came knocking. He saw potential in the Chinese market, which had been closed off to American films since 1949, and wanted me to try and crack it open. I was suddenly planted at a studio in LA, now connecting Chinese audiences to American films. Bringing Gregory Peck, for instance, for a retrospective of his films to China was one of my proudest moments, and Roman Holiday continues to be a favorite among Chinese audiences. I once again personally witnessed how films were creating a palpable bridge between 2 nations. While ensconced on the Universal lot, I received a call from none other than Steven Spielberg's office. Was this a joke? He wanted to make a movie in China, and here I could help. Being hired on this gargantuan production with 5,000 extras shooting on the streets of Shanghai, working closely with Steven on his opus Empire of the Sun, was clearly something that only happens in fantasies, right? And of course, I had no business being there except for all the impractical things that led up to it. After that amazing experience, I simply died and went to heaven, so I'm not really here. No, just kidding. Working on that movie made me realize what I wanted to be when I grew up, finally. A producer, someone who has a direct hand in the images and words on screen, but also hires all the truly skilled people to execute. What could be better? By the way, I was 30 years old when I figured that out. So you grads have tons of time. Don't worry. Oh, sorry, parents. I meant get on with it, grads. Get on with it, and don't be a sloth like me. Now, almost 3 decades, 3.5 decades, and about 16 movies later after that first production, my mission and fundamental values to bring underrepresented voices to the fore and increase empathy through film have been the steady drumbeat of my work. In several cases, that has meant Asian American voices such as The Joy Luck Club, Dark Matter, Shanghai Calling, and Over the Moon. But it has also meant movies about someone who called himself a pig, but a pig who has rights, the porn publisher Larry Flint, or about falsely accused preschool teachers in the award-winning HBO movie Indictment in the McMartin trial. I've made several other films you have never heard of because the missed successes are always flops. And that is true of just about every creative path. The line is not a straight one, but often jagged or fuzzy. We so often work in total darkness with no assurance of success or progress, and certainly there are no guarantees of fame and fortune. But what keeps me focused is the journey and not the destination. In fact, as you can see, I rarely knew what my endpoint was. This is what I call, perhaps euphemistically, a creative path. It is one that all of you can follow in designing your lives. And just because mine led to culture and entertainment, every other option is open to you. On this creative journey, underlying principles and values led the way for me, and I'm happy to share what I think they are. 1, curiosity. It was pure curiosity that jump-started my journey. And you may not have to move halfway around the world to satisfy yours, but please always stay interested in other ways of thought, behavior, and without judgment. Check your own biases. Stay open to inspiration from anywhere. 2, courage. It took a lot of courage for me to live in a place that was closed off for decades and to find my parents in the process. It took confidence to stand by Steven's side on a giant production, or to sit in many rooms with all older white men and learn to speak with authority. It takes courage to leap into the unknown without any guardrails. You are all facing unprecedented challenges, be it climate change, AI, political divisiveness. My generation is not nearly as well equipped as yours to face these challenges, so you must explore solutions that may not be obvious. Some may think you are foolhardy at times, but use one of the most important resources you have, your own instincts, your knowledge of self. Sylvia Plath once said, "The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt." Another important thing, collaboration. Find your tribe, build community. Your peers are some of your greatest teachers and your greatest support system. There's practically nothing we can do alone. Find people who complement and inspire you. And finally, there's that ineffable thing called a calling. It may be large or small, but by examining your core purpose, the values you cherish, you can build your own narrative. My calling was the result of my life experience, starting with the feeling of not belonging. Upon reflection, while I forged ahead to give others the opportunity to feel seen, to feel like they belonged, I was healing my own childhood wounds. Imagine my thrill when, during my first year as president of the Academy, the very first Best Actress Oscar went to an Asian woman, Michelle Yeoh. 86 years earlier, an actress named Louise Rayner won Best Actress for playing an Asian woman in Yellowface. That would never, ever happen today. Believe in the power of change and your ability to be an agent of it. This is your life and yours only, so seize it with gusto. You are the composer and conductor of your own symphony. I used to play in an orchestra, and in rehearsals, all the musicians would individually tune their instruments, resulting in total cacophony. But then the conductor would lift the baton, and with one downbeat, all the disparate voices came magically together to make brilliant, harmonious music. As Pablo Picasso said, art is chaos taking shape. My hope for you is that you take the strands of your life, however disparate, and make beautiful music. My hope for you, too, is that your creation is filled with joy, truth, purpose, compassion, and love. And in the process, you are able to help lift humanity. Thank you again for having me today. I am beyond honored.